You're listening to Reverie, True Crime, your gateway to the darkest corners of human nature, where we expose the hidden truths of human depravity. These harrowing stories serve as a sobering reminder to keep our senses keen and our awareness sharp, for predators lurk in unexpected places, patiently waiting and observing. Join us as we unravel mysteries, explore motives, and seek justice for victims as we bring awareness to these cases. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. In this episode, we will continue to follow the story of 15-year-old Amy Fitzpatrick, who disappeared without a trace after leaving her friend's home. We'll go through a few details I missed about what Amy actually had with her the night she went missing. 2 break-ins in 2 different places that targeted her belongings, and the tragic death of her brother, Dean. This is a story of grief, of questions that still need answers, and a family torn by loss. If you have any information you'd like to pass along, you can send an email to Cold Case Investigator Jared Adams at coldcaseinvestigations@proton.me. That's Cold Case Investigations at proton.me. I'll also have this information in the show notes. So before we get started, I need to clear up a few things that I found since part 1 as I kept digging. First, I read in many newspapers regarding what Amy had with her when she left her friend Ashley's, that she left with nothing. Other sources I've stumbled across since say that when Amy left Ashley's house, she was carrying a Bershka bag with a tracksuit inside that Ashley had given to her, and a pink cell phone. I also found that Amy's phone was discovered in her home during one of the early police searches. Her friend, Ashley Rose, told the Herald, quote, "It looks to me like Amy made it home. She had that phone in our house, and then her mother had it in the interview. I remember she used the phone to access her mother's number on New Year's Eve and rang the number from our house." End quote. Amy had 2 phones. One she had brought with her from Ireland, and the other was a phone she had gotten in Spain. The cell phone she got in Spain had been broken after it was thrown against a wall, but Amy kept her cell phone from Ireland with her. It wasn't connected to a network, but that's where she had all of her contacts, and she listened to music on it. Ashley told the Guardia Civil, but nobody followed up on it or took it seriously. In 2017, Ashley and her mother Debbie talked to Dublin Live, both saying it completely dismantles the theory of the Spanish police that she was kidnapped on the way to her home, and it's plausible that she went missing after she got back home. Ashley said, quote, "This phone was being held up in the news on the television by Audrey, Amy's mom. I was with her nearly every day, and she always had it with her because it was the phone she listened to her music on. The other Spanish phone was just to make calls on if she had credit, and people could call her, but that phone had been smashed about a month before or something like that. She had the other phone to listen to music, and she had her dad's number on it, because we would go to the internet cafe and maybe she would call her dad. I remember that phone because we would be listening to music. It was the time when Shane Ward had just come out. I know she got back there to her home. We've always said she got back. I'm 100% sure she got back." She had the phone on her when she left here. I have had detectives from the Guardia Civil from Madrid call me and ask about that phone. I've made statements about it a few times. We, referring to herself and her mom Debbie, both know she had that phone with her." End quote. Audrey told the Late Late Show after the host Pat Kenny held up Amy's phone for all to see that it was found on her bed under some of Amy's clothes. Audrey claimed it wasn't out of the ordinary and that they would also leave their back door unlocked for her because she was always forgetting her key as well. Also, one of the earliest and most bizarre developments I came across was in the form of two break-ins, one in May and one in August of 2008. A few months after Amy went missing, someone forced their way into Audrey and Dave's lawyer's office. The only thing stolen was a file connected to Amy's disappearance. Nothing else was touched. Their lawyer said the thief or thieves forced their way into his property by prizing open a locked garden gate. He said, quote, "The stolen documents included confidential police reports about Fitzpatrick's disappearance. I believe the burglary was related to Fitzpatrick's disappearance. It makes no sense that they took the documents, which financially are worthless, and left behind all my expensive valuables, like TVs, computers, and music equipment." End quote. Another source, the Irish Independent, talked to Audrey. Not only was there a break-in at the lawyer's home, but a few months later, their home was broken into as well. And Amy's cell phone was stolen. This was reported in August of 2008, just 3 months after the lawyer's home was broken into. Someone broke one of Audrey and Dave's windows and crept inside while Audrey was out with a friend. Dave claimed he had just gotten home from the gym and saw that Amy's room had been ransacked and flipped upside down. They stole a computer with all of the missing poster designs and hundreds of very important phone numbers that they'd been collecting since Amy disappeared. They also took some of Dave's deceased mother's jewelry. The robbery happened sometime between 2 and 4 p.m. Dave said, quote, "They pushed in a window in the TV room to get in. They ransacked the place. We haven't touched Amy's room since she disappeared. It was a shrine to her. They've turned it upside down and pulled all her clothes out of the wardrobe. The worst thing is they've stolen Audrey's laptop, which she'd been using in the search for Amy. It had everything on it. Poster designs, numbers of the Irish ambassador in Spain, even the mobile number of Bertie Ahern, who we met in Dublin while he was still the Taoiseach. Losing it is really going to set us back." End quote. Audrey added, "If these people have a heart, I'd urge them to return my laptop. There are numbers on there we'll never be able to recover." In an interview from a 2017 article, Audrey stated, quote, "The phone was robbed when we had a break-in at the house in Spain. As stupidly as women do, you leave everything in the top drawer that's of value, and I had actually stopped bringing it around with me because I was afraid I'd lose it, and it had all her photographs and text on it. I don't know how they can say she had the phone at the time because she had no credit on it," she added. She quickly moved on to another subject, but she had to realize Ashley and Debbie said they knew Amy did not have any credit on her phone, which means she couldn't make phone calls or text, but she could still listen to any music she had saved on it and see her contacts list. Okay, I know that's a super long intro, but I always want to make sure that I correct any mistakes and add any information I happen to find even after the episode is published. So please keep all of those facts in mind as we go through part 2. Let's get into it. As we ended part 1, it had been exactly a year since Amy's disappearance. As we pick back up on February 6th, 2009, the day before Amy's 17th birthday, a letter arrived from Spanish Prime Minister Jose Luis Rodriguez Zapatero. In the letter, addressed to Irish Taoiseach Brian Cowen, the Prime Minister offered words of assurance. He promised Spain's commitment to finding out what happened to Amy. He described the Spanish police's efforts as diligent and determined and asked Brian to pass along his solidarity to Amy's grieving family. The Prime Minister's words were respectful and comforting. He promised there would be updates from authorities including the Spanish police and the Irish embassy, and reassured them of Spain's objective to advance the investigation. But to a devastated mother who still didn't have her daughter back home, words, even from a prime minister, let's be real, can feel empty and pointless. Audrey had never stopped believing that Amy would come home, despite more than a year of no contact, no sightings, and no evidence. She kept preparing for her daughter's return. On that night, as politicians traded letters, Audrey spent her time doing what many would not understand. She redecorated Amy's room, holding on to hope that Amy would come through that door. On Amy's 17th birthday, Audrey publicly begged Amy to come home once again. Her father, Christopher, also wrote a public plea, quote, "Amy, if you can see this, I promised at the beginning of this nightmare I would never give up on the search for you, and I will continue until I find you." End quote. In April of 2009, a man walking near Mijas, the same area where Amy was last seen, made a gruesome discovery. Inside of a sewage pipe close to the Mijas football stadium, only 10 minutes from Audrey and Dave's house, were charred human remains, part of a skull and torso. The scene had clearly been set on fire the night before. Authorities believed gasoline was used. Everyone speculated if this could be Amy. Was this the ending her family had feared for so long? Forensic teams rushed to the site. The body was so badly burned, they couldn't immediately determine the sex or age. But Audrey did not believe it was her daughter. Quote, "I've spoken to the Guardia Civil. They're telling me the body is that of a man. I'm confident it's not Amy's. For me, nothing has changed. I'm still praying nothing bad's happened to her and she'll come home one day soon." End quote. Forensic experts were working around the clock to find answers. At the end of it all, Audrey was right. It wasn't Amy. In June of 2009, a tip came in from a builder named George O'Neill, who lived in the nearby town of Coen, and came forward with something that he could not forget. He said that just a few days after Amy vanished, around January 3rd or 4th, he was in a petrol station cafe, maybe a mile and a half from where Amy lived, and he saw a teenage girl sitting in the cafe who looked like Amy, drinking her coffee and buying cigarettes. At the time, he told police, but nothing came of it, not even a follow-up. So at this point, it was a year later, and he decided to go public with the information. He still believed it was her. Amy's mom took it seriously. She said she'd bring it up at her next meeting with the Guardia Civil. She was having sit-downs with investigators every month. She felt it would be looked at again. Maybe there was something they missed. Maybe the man was wrong. Or maybe he actually did see something that no one else did. Audrey had been doing everything she could think of to keep Amy's face out there. Posters were still up everywhere. She kept giving interviews and always gave the same details over and over in case the right person finally heard them. As we know, sometimes all it takes is one person remembering just one thing. Back in Dublin, Amy's dad, Christopher, had hired a private investigator of his own. He was not content with waiting forever for the police to give him updates anymore. Even local comedians were stepping up and showing support. Dave Young, a well-known Dublin performer, was organizing a fundraiser to help the family continue the hunt for Amy. Still in June, private detectives from a firm in Barcelona who had worked on Madeleine McCann's case approached Audrey to investigate a pricey ultimatum she had received. She accepted their help. Even though she suspected it was fake, there was a part of her that needed to know for sure either way. She had not told anyone, not even her family, that she'd been talking to the detectives about the fishy ransom message she received. The ransom demand reportedly came from an African man who called Audrey and asked if she was Amy's mother. She told him she was, and then the man said Amy had been kidnapped and was now being held in Madrid. He went on to tell her that in 2 hours he would be calling her back with a name and an address. Audrey told reporters, quote, "So, I agreed, of course. 5 hours later, I got a text saying, 'Can you pay us 500,000 euros? Yes or no? Send your answer now, and we will send you all the information you need.' 2 hours later, he texted again, saying he was still waiting for my answer. I'm almost certain it was a con, but there is a chance he has something. There is no proof yet." End quote. It was reported that the investigators found whoever was calling was using pay-as-you-go cell phones that were untraceable, and that it was all a scam. Audrey said, quote, "Although I know it was a scam, I must admit that if I had a suitcase of money worth €500,000, I would have just said, 'Okay, where and when do you want it?' My heart had been in my mouth, and I had been praying." End quote. Christmas of 2009 arrived, and Audrey refused to give in to despair. She clung tightly to the belief that Amy was still alive somewhere. Quote, "She's very stubborn and strong-minded. She's independent, and that's the one thing I know will help her stay safe." End quote. Every month, without fail, Audrey met with the police. She and Dave had made it their mission to keep Amy's name alive. They brainstormed new ways to keep her story in the public eye. They were determined to never let Amy become just another forgotten face. A group of Irish businessmen who chose to stay anonymous donated money for 2 massive billboards along the motorway near where Amy disappeared. One billboard was in Spanish, the other in English. Both had a picture of Amy and a plea for information. Audrey said, "We are deeply grateful. Anything that helps find Amy is appreciated." Audrey was also infuriated about the recent reports of attempted abductions in the same area where Amy had gone missing. Just weeks before, a teenage girl named Grace Preston, who was around Amy's age, barely escaped being forced into a van while walking home from school in Kalahanda. Grace described the experience as terrifying. She miraculously got away and ran right to a shopping center, hiding in a bar. Grace called her parents, who were in a nearby supermarket. They called the police and they began an investigation. Officers found the attempted kidnapping was tied to an underground sex trade. Grace's father, an architect, Quentin Preston, said, quote, "You'd never think it's going to be your son or daughter until it happens to you. But they are teenagers. We can't watch them all the time." End quote. The Prestons had been living in the area for the last 6 years. Quentin recommended to younger people that they should not go out alone in Kalahanda. Another incident followed on November 23, 2009. Two boys, just 12 years old, were approached by men in a white transit van while they were sitting on the side of the road drinking water. The men sprang out of the van and attempted to grab the boys, but they were so fortunate and got away. The boys were able to fight them off and took off running to safety to call their families. The police were notified about what happened, but by the time they got there, unsurprisingly, the men were long gone. To Audrey, these cases were not just alarming and frightening, they were maddening. Quote, "I have said it before and I'll say it again. Whoever took Amy is still out there. If it can happen once, it can happen again." End quote. Now, as another Christmas passed without her daughter, Audrey recalled stopping at a tiny Catholic church during a drive with David, where they found comfort in prayer. The priest, who happened to be an Irishman, even said a Christmas Eve Mass for Amy. Audrey said, quote, "It doesn't get easier with the passage of time. It just gets harder. Every day that passes does not ease the pain. It increases it." End quote. On January 2nd, 2010, now officially 2 years since Amy went missing, Audrey told the Evening Herald, quote, "I believe there's a 1% chance she ran away and a 99% chance she was abducted. For her not to have made contact with me, with her brother Dean, who she was so close to, it's just unbelievable." End quote. She knew Amy would never have stayed silent on her own, saying, quote, "If she hasn't got in touch, I think either she can't or she's not around." The pain of uncertainty was made worse by other tragedies. Amy's cousin, singer Beverly O'Sullivan, had just been killed in a car crash 2 months earlier in India. Yet another heartbreak, and sadly, as we later find out, it wouldn't be the last, because someone even closer to home is murdered. A reporter at the Evening Herald asked Audrey if they had thought about moving somewhere else, and she responded, quote, "I will never leave here while we don't know where Amy is. I even get anxious going back to Ireland for a few days, because I fear that it might be a time where Amy could have plucked up the courage to come home, and there would be nobody here." End quote. At the beginning of March, there was a heart-stopping phone call made to Audrey. A skeleton had been found. It was discovered in a stream in the Costa del Sol, not far, just 60 kilometers, which is about 37 miles from the place where Amy had disappeared. The headlines spread quickly. Amy's aunt, Christine Kenny, was one of the first to hear all the way in Dublin, and as soon as reports reached her, she called Amy's father, Christopher. The thought, the possibility, shook him. After all this time of not knowing any answers to the questions he had, of blind hope, of wanting to know what happened to her, facing the thought of possibly finding her remains was too overwhelming and scary. Audrey heard the news too. At first, there were few details, just that part of a skeleton, a leg, they would later say, had been found in a stream. The painful waiting to hear if it was Amy began. Then the call finally came. A friend who had been speaking with the local police got the confirmation. The remains were definitely not Amy's. It was a sigh of relief for Amy's family because they could still hang on to hope that they'd someday find her alive. Audrey could still imagine her daughter out there somewhere, waiting to come home. On April 16th, Audrey and Dave announced they were offering €1 million, which is around 1.1 million US dollars, that 4 friends came together to give them in exchange for information leading to Amy, dead or alive. The reward would only be available for 1 month. They said 4 of their friends in Ireland had given €250,000 each, which Audrey and Dave put in their lawyer's account in hopes of someone coming forward. Dave said, quote, "We believe someone knows something about Amy's disappearance. We are going through hell and we want to find out what's happened to her either way. We think if they are not going to give Amy up in a month, they never will." End quote. They both said that whoever came forward could remain anonymous. Audrey and Dave had not wanted to openly criticize the Spanish police, investigators, Irish diplomats, and politicians since the beginning, but they finally let their feelings be publicly known. There was a tip about a suspicious Englishman who was going around supposedly boasting to other expats that he had sex with a friend of Amy's, a teenager. So technically, if true, he raped her. This man was also said to have bragged about inviting Amy over to his house. Shortly after it was reported that Amy had gone missing, he left Costa del Sol. Dave said, quote, "When the Spanish police started their inquiries, we were very happy with their work. More than 2.5 years later, we're not very happy with a lot of things that are going on. All we've had from the Irish government and diplomats are a lot of empty promises. They're happy enough to pose for photos and say they're going to help us, but then they do nothing." End quote. The next year, May of 2011, Audrey was pissed. Recently, she and Dave were fighting back against accusations that claimed they had allowed Amy to spiral into an erratic lifestyle, one filled with drugs, alcohol, and late-night parties in dangerous places. People suggested they had neglected her so badly that she had to root around in dumpsters for food and borrow clothes from friends. But Audrey said those were all lies. She was furious. Quote, "Amy didn't drink, she didn't smoke marijuana, and she wasn't neglected." End quote. Audrey spoke out because she was afraid that these damaging stories would stop people from searching for her daughter. Quote, People might think she ran away on her own, and that would be a tragedy. We've spent the last 3.5 years trying to find out what happened to her. This kind of thing just makes it harder. It stops people from coming forward with information." End quote. Audrey wanted to know if Amy's life was really in such disarray as people claimed. Why was she babysitting the night before she disappeared? Why was she helping someone else on New Year's Eve, the one night teenagers usually want to be out having fun? A new lead surfaced exactly 1 year later in May of 2012. A tip came in through Facebook that claimed a dangerous man, an Irish gangster named Eric Wilson, also called Eric Lucky Wilson, might be connected to Amy's disappearance. Audrey and Dave did not waste a moment. They immediately reached out to Irish authorities, begging them to investigate. A man had come forward saying Eric Wilson had been going around bragging about killing Amy. Audrey and Dave were desperate but hopeful. Quote, "We are hopeful there will be movement on this, and we believe the information we have is credible." End quote. Eric Wilson, a convicted killer from Ballyfermot, Dublin, had a violent past. He was serving a 23-year prison sentence for the cold-blooded killing of a British man in Spain. At the time of Amy's disappearance, Eric Wilson was living in the same area. He had rented a farm in Coen, less than 30 kilometers from where Amy had been staying. According to the tip, he'd bragged about what he'd done. Audrey and Dave went to the exact area where Eric had been staying, hoping for some sign that could bring them closer to the truth. They also informed Gardaí in Ireland and hoped the Spanish police would join in the investigation. The information was so serious that it was expected to be shared with Interpol. Amy's disappearance wasn't the first mystery tied to Eric Wilson's name. He had been linked to a string of unsolved killings in 2006 and 2007. In 2010, he shot a man dead in broad daylight after a drunken fight over a girl. Now it had been said that the girl involved in that fight was one of Amy's friends. Even more unsettling, Amy had been spotted near the scene not long before she vanished. Could there be a connection? The most damning suspicions weren't about strangers at all. They were about someone much closer. Amy had told friends she feared her mother's partner, Dave Mahon. She said he was violent, that he scared her, that she did not feel safe around him. That fear would soon be validated. In early 2013, Dave got behind the wheel in North Dublin after drinking too much. He ended up being pulled over after a Garda noticed him driving erratically and dangerously. Dave had sped past the Garda's vehicle, swerved through traffic, and nearly caused a crash. When the Garda followed him, Dave ran red lights and sped through a housing estate. He was hammered. In March of 2013, the Dublin District Court sentenced him to 4 months in jail and banned him from driving for 5 years. But Dave appealed, hoping for leniency. And he got it. On appeal, Judge James O'Donoghue suspended the prison sentence, but there was one condition: that Dave stay out of trouble for the next 12 months. The judge also shortened his driving ban to the legal minimum of 2 years, given the amount of alcohol in his system. 99 milligrams per 100 milliliters of breath, which is a blood alcohol level of 0.99. The judge took note of Dave's clean record, his cooperation with police, and pitied him. Quote, "I'm very sorry to hear about your personal tragedy. I can understand how this whole thing happened." End quote. The next month, at the end of April, Dave looked relieved in court. Outside the building, he said he was grateful for the kindness showed to him. Quote, "I was delighted with the sympathy shown to me. But how long would that sympathy last?" Tragedy struck Amy's family again while they were in Dublin. Amy's brother, 23-year-old Dean Fitzpatrick, was in a relationship with his loving partner, Sarah O'Rourke, and he was a wonderful father of their sweet 2-year-old little boy, Leon. As a refresher, Dean Fitzpatrick moved to Dublin as soon as he turned 18 to be close to his biological father, Christopher. Dean was found stabbed in the street by a passerby who called for help. He was sent to Beaumont Hospital, where he was sadly pronounced deceased. Now I will go through this case and the trial of his killer that will take us to 2016. I'd like to do it this way for 2 reasons. I don't really want to switch back and forth between topics because it can get confusing and a little overwhelming to keep up with. It will also provide important information to keep in the back of your mind when we come back to 2013 and pick up where we left off about Amy, because what I feel like is a critical piece in the paper about her came out shortly after her brother died, but that will be for you to decide if it's relevant in your opinion or not. Dean's killer turned himself in at the Garda station in Coolock, but only after Dean's body was found in the street in Northern Cross on the night of March 24th, going into the morning of the 25th. The person who killed Dean was none other than his 42-year-old stepfather, Dave. Dave did not go to the station for at least 12 hours after the stabbing happened. Audrey said she wasn't there the night the stabbing occurred. Years later, she said, quote, "That night I was staying with my dad because he had Alzheimer's, and we used to do shifts with him. I couldn't leave my dad until I got someone else to mind him. Of course, it would just happen that one night I wasn't in the apartment. Things could have been different. Things would have been different had I been there, but I wasn't. It's all ifs and buts and maybes, and you can't change the past, you know?" End quote. Dave was arrested and only held for 24 hours without charge. The funeral for Dean Dino Fitzpatrick was scheduled for Friday in Coolock. Audrey had made the arrangements, but Dean's father, Christopher, had not been consulted. Neither had Dean's partner and mother of their son, Sarah. Their names were missing from the death notice. Christopher, blindsided, sought out legal advice. He wanted to be part of his son's farewell. He wanted Dean buried in a new grave, one where, if Amy was ever found, she could rest beside him. Audrey disagreed. She wanted Dean buried with her mother. The disagreement escalated. Solicitors got involved. The funeral was called off. Dave, who had said he wouldn't attend the funeral, planned to pay his respects privately at the funeral home. That visit was canceled too. In the end, there was no service that day, no closure, just more waiting. A family found themselves further divided. and Dean, the young man at the center of it all, remained unburied. The dispute over Dean's funeral arrangements was eventually resolved in the High Court. The judge ordered that Dean's body be released to his darling partner, Sarah, the mother of their 18-month-old son, Leon. Both parents were to have an equal say in the funeral arrangements. The court's decision allowed the family to proceed with the funeral, aiming to honor Dean's memory respectfully and bring some measure of closure to his loved ones. The Church of the Holy Trinity was filled with friends and family, all struggling to comprehend the senseless loss. Christopher cradled his grandson as he led the procession, followed closely by Sarah, who Dean loved and was crazy about. Audrey couldn't make it to the funeral because she had gotten sick the evening before, after attending her son's removal from the funeral home. Inside the church, the atmosphere was heavy with grief. Father McChrystal spoke of Dean's lively spirit, his devotion to his son, and the impact his death had on those who knew him. Personal items such as a baseball cap, a miniature bicycle, headphones, and a cross were placed on Dean's coffin, symbolizing his passions and the life he had lived. Dean's best friend, Kevin Harris, delivered a moving tribute, recalling Dean's infectious energy and the love he had for his family and friends. Quote, "He always had a big smile on his face and was full of energy. He loved his partner Sarah. He loved her daughter Sophie as his own, and he doted on their son Leon." End quote. As the service came to an end, 7 white doves were released into the sky, a touching yet painful farewell to a young man whose life had ended too soon. Dean was laid to rest in Fingal Cemetery, a place his father hoped would one day also be the final resting place for Amy, should she ever be found. The family tried to find comfort in the memories of happier times, even as they faced an uncertain future. In court, it was learned that Dean had confronted Dave multiple times about Amy's disappearance. He believed that Dave knew more than he ever let on. Dean had also told people that he was scared of what might happen if he kept asking questions. Dave was a heavy drinker, according to reports, and seemed to be unhinged at times. Like I said before, even Amy told her friends that she was scared of Dave and hated being at home. It was said in court that Dave had been drinking a great deal the day the stabbing happened, and that he, quote, plunged the knife into Dean Fitzpatrick so hard that it went right through the victim's stomach, as far as his spine. The prosecution would later tell a jury that Dean had been stabbed so severely that his guts came out, adding, quote, in common terms, he had been gutted. The prosecution said that the blade of the knife went through Dean's muscles and bowel, slashing his aorta and leaving a 3-centimeter groove on his spine. The wound was 14 centimeters, or 5 inches, long. The prosecution laid out what they believed happened. On the night in question, Dean cycled to Dave's apartment, arriving just after 11 p.m. He'd apparently been called there. Video footage showed him going inside the apartment, and only minutes later, Dave was seen leaving the same building with another man hailing a taxi. Inside the apartment, Dave had been drinking with his friend, But at some point, the vibe shifted and an argument began. According to the prosecution, when Dean tried to leave, Dave followed him out and, in a moment of violence, stabbed him in the abdomen with a carving knife. Even though Dean was seriously wounded, he managed to run, stumbling, but he didn't get far. He collapsed a short distance away. He died the following day, March 25th, in the hospital. Dave's version of events was very different. His counsel told the court that Dave claimed it was all an accident, that Dean had brought the knife into the confrontation and in the heat of the moment had somehow walked into the knife. There was even a suggestion that Dean was suicidal and walked into it on purpose. But the prosecution questioned that version strongly. Quote, "Suicide by stepfather," one prosecuting attorney remarked pointedly, saying how difficult it would be for the jury to accept that explanation given the severity of Dean's injuries. There were also details of a prior confrontation. Just days earlier, Dean had allegedly taken Dave's water bottle off of Dave's bike outside of a gym, simply to annoy him. He didn't do any harm to the bike, but their relationship had been very tense. After the stabbing, the court heard, Dave returned to his apartment, told a friend what had happened, and hours later turned himself in to the police. On the day Dean lost his life, tensions had already been simmering, and for Sarah O'Rourke, the young woman Dean loved and who he was raising a child with, it erupted into fear. Sarah stood in the witness box at the Central Criminal Court, recounting the frightening phone call she received from Dean's stepfather, Dave. It was a conversation she had not expected, and one she would never forget. She told the court that Dave, a man she barely knew and had only met a few times, had called her out of the blue. His voice was sharp and angry. He was demanding to speak to Dean. She recalled, quote, "I told him Dean wasn't there, but he just kept saying put him on. He didn't believe me." Then she said his tone got really dark. Sarah testified that Dave threatened her, that if she didn't get Dean to return his call or come to his apartment, that he would come to her home and stab her. She remembered his words, quote, "He said he'd stick a knife in my head or my neck," end quote. Worried and shaken up, Sarah sent Dean a text message. She told him what had happened, that Dave had threatened her, that he'd been aggressive, and that he seemed out of control. She didn't try to sugarcoat it. She told Dean he needed to go to Dave's apartment and deal with whatever was going on, just to try to defuse the situation before it spiraled. Sarah had no idea that that would be the last time she talked to the man she loved. Later that night, Dean Fitzpatrick would cycle over to his stepfather's apartment. Minutes after arriving, he would be dead, and that phone call to Sarah, her warning, would become a tragic marker of the storm building behind closed doors. Taxi driver Carl O'Toole had known David for some time. On the night of May 25th, 2013, Dave called him and asked him to come over to his apartment on Dublin's Malahide Road. When Carl arrived, what he saw immediately set off alarm bells. The apartment was a mess. Dave was drunk, clearly agitated. His words were slurred, his thoughts scattered. Carl noticed an empty whiskey bottle swinging from a plastic bag behind the door. Xanax packets were scattered everywhere. And then there was something else, something really strange. Pictures. Scattered among the clutter were pictures of David's mother and of Amy Fitzpatrick. It struck Carl as odd to see their photos carelessly tossed all around like trash. It was unsettling. It felt symbolic, like something had broken inside. Dave told Carl he'd had enough. He said things were over between him and Audrey. The conversation soon turned to Dean. He told Carl just days earlier Dean had allegedly messed with his bike, taking a water bottle from it outside of a gym. It might have seemed like something small, but to Dave it clearly bothered him so much that it festered. Or maybe it was all the questions Dean had been asking that made him so upset. Dave had been texting Dean constantly, trying to confront him about the water bottle, trying to get him to come and, quote, sort it out. Eventually, Dean did show up at the apartment. Carl was there. He said both men were tense, but it seemed like the argument had been settled. The bike part would be returned. Dean got ready to leave, and then everything changed. Barely a minute after Dean walked out, Dave went back into the apartment holding a large knife. Carl's heart dropped. Later he would say, quote, "It was a long knife. Everything went from 0 to 100 in that short space of time." End quote. He was in shock. It had all happened so quickly, too quickly to understand. Dave wanted to get out. They left the apartment and drove through the night in Carl's taxi. No destination, just silence, and then a confession. Carl said, quote, "He says to me that he thinks Dean is dead, that he thinks the knife went through him." End quote. For Carl, it was a night he couldn't forget. For Dean's family, it was another chapter in a story already touched deeply by grief and tragedy. David Mahon, after 12 hours, walked into Coolock Garda Station in Dublin with tears streaming down his face. He leaned on a walking stick, visibly shaking, saying, "It was me. I didn't know he was dead. I just heard it on the news this morning." The man standing before the Gardaí wasn't there under arrest. Not yet. As he sobbed, he said, quote, "God forgive me, but he's a little bastard. It's my fault he's dead." End quote. That moment became a central piece of the trial, now slowly unfolding at the Central Criminal Court. Dave claimed the two had argued the night before about the bike, about years of friction, about Dean's choices. He said Dean had pulled weapons on him before, even a gun once. Quote, "He was always putting it up to me," Dave claimed of Dean, who was no longer here to defend himself. Some speculate maybe Dean got too close to answers, asked too many questions, and maybe, just maybe, Dave silenced him. Dave insisted their argument was different. This time, he said, Dean had walked into the knife. He described pulling a knife from the kitchen. Not to use it, he said, but to confront his stepson. Quote, "What are you doing, pulling a knife on your father?" And then, according to him, it happened in an instant. Dean moved forward and the blade went in. Afterward, Dave said he got rid of the knife while a friend drove him around aimlessly. He didn't want a solicitor. He just kept repeating it. He walked into it. I didn't kill him. Detectives remembered how distraught he was. Quote, he was visibly shaking. He kept asking if it was true, if Dean was really dead. But Dave's words came off as a deep bitterness. He called Dean a scumbag, a bastard, someone who sold drugs, carried knives, robbed bikes. He said he'd told Audrey before that he didn't want Dean around. Still, when asked if he'd meant to kill Dean, he broke down. Oh, fuck, Jesus Christ, no. A waste of life, he called it. That same day, Deputy State Pathologist Dr. Michael Curtis took the stand. He'd performed the post-mortem examination. What he found was devastating. A single stab wound, about 14.5 centimeters deep, slicing through muscle, damaging the abdominal aorta, the body's main blood vessel, and piercing the small intestine. The wound ended at the spine, where it left a groove in the bone. Dean bled to death. Despite emergency care, the injury was too severe to survive. Dr. Curtis was asked whether someone could have, quote, run onto a knife, like Dave claimed. He said it was possible. The track of the wound was almost straight, with only a slight upward angle, something that could have happened by accident or by force. He couldn't say for certain which. There was one more detail. On Dean's forearm, the pathologist noted several old scars. Perhaps, he suggested, they were from self-harm, though he couldn't say for sure. It was just a possibility. A forensic scientist, Dr. Fiona Thornton, also gave evidence. She examined Dave's clothes. His shirt had a jagged tear near the bottom, and there was a hole in the back pocket of his jeans, the same pocket where Dave said he'd stuffed the knife after taking it from Dean. She confirmed the damage matched the story. But as the prosecution said in their opening remarks, this was not just a fight or a tragedy. This was a gutting. Even as the medical experts debated whether the wound was accidental or deliberate, one thing was painfully clear. Dean Fitzpatrick's life had ended violently, suddenly, and the people closest to him were left to pick up the pieces. The courtroom was quiet as Detective Sergeant Eddie Carroll took the stand again. This time it wasn't just about what David Mahon had said. It was about what Dean had lived through. Gardai, after hearing Dave's accounts of a difficult relationship with his stepson, had secured Dean's mental health records. They painted a picture of a young man in deep turmoil long before his final night. Dean, the court learned, had begun using drugs as early as 11 years old, hash, cocaine, tablets. By 19, he told health professionals that alcohol gave him a kind of invincibility, saying he felt like Superman, that nothing could happen to him when he drank. But behind the bravado was a young man spinning between highs and crushing lows. Quote, I have 3 or 4 mood swings a day. I can't control it. I need something to calm me down. By 2011, he'd admitted himself into a hospital, a crisis admission triggered by everything from housing issues and family stress to legal trouble. There were times that he self-harmed. He cut his forearms. He stabbed himself in the hand, saying he wanted to die. Dean had told a medic that he had been convicted in Spain for the attempted murder of a police officer, a claim Garday couldn't verify, but which Dave echoed, saying Dean had once stolen his car and run down an officer. It was a portrait of someone carrying enormous psychological weight and sadness, especially about missing his sister Amy, who had vanished in 2008. The detective agreed that Dean had described self-harming as a form of release tied to feelings of depression about Amy. The struggles from his past were seemingly weaponized against him to support the theory that he'd walked into the knife. If anything were to ever happen to me, I hope that my past is not weaponized against me in my own alleged murder. If Dean walked into that knife, why would he try to get away? That seems like an action of someone who's scared, trying to run, not wanting to die. He had a loving girlfriend and son to go home to. It just didn't make sense, and he wasn't there to tell his side. Back in court, the jury watched footage of Dave's interviews with the Garday. In one, he stood up and tried to physically demonstrate how Dean had, quote, walked into the knife. Dave had come in voluntarily. He wasn't under arrest at first, but he never stopped saying it, quote, it was my fault. Later that day, following his formal arrest, Detective Garda Brendan Mears interviewed Dave. He confirmed he had seen a solicitor, quote, they said not to say anything, but look, I've nothing to hide. It's my fault. I can't believe it. What will Audrey say? 23 years of age. Jesus Christ. We've been going out for 12 years. We moved to Spain. You know, Amy went missing. Dave spoke of a once lavish life in Spain. 8 or 9 houses and bars, he said. We were millionaires, really, but spent it all looking for Amy. End quote. And now, another child was gone. I wish it was me, Dave repeated. He talked about his rocky relationship with Dean, saying not good, up and down. He admitted to hitting Dean once in Spain when he said Dean had pulled a knife on him. Now, sitting in a prison cell, he asked out loud, quote, did he want to walk into the knife? Is it an accident or murder? I don't know, but it's my fault. End quote. Dave's fears turned toward Audrey, saying, this is going to kill her. The stress. How much can anybody take? Then came the moment that prosecutors would surely seize on. Dave acknowledged that Dean had texted him, quote, what's this? You're gonna stab me? End quote. Of the text, Dave said, quote, I know it doesn't look good for me, but it is what it is. End quote. He claimed again he had not meant it. The threats, the words exchanged in the heat of frustration, quote, I told Audrey I was going to stab him, but I didn't mean it. End quote. And perhaps, most chillingly, Dave said, quote, part of me thinks he wanted it, but I don't know. End quote. In the quiet stillness of the Central Criminal Court, grief spoke louder than any gavel ever could. There was no shielding the courtroom from the pain that spilled from the words of parents, partners, and children who were forever changed by Dean Fitzpatrick's death. Audrey, mother of the victim, wife of the man who caused his death, stood at the center of a human contradiction. Quote, he will always be my husband and my best friend, she told the court, her voice steady with a kind of hardened sorrow. She said the words as Dave sat a few feet away, awaiting sentencing for the manslaughter of her son. Christopher Fitzpatrick, Dean's father, said his world first collapsed when his daughter Amy disappeared in Spain on New Year's Day 2008. Then it shattered again in May of 2013 when he had to identify Dean's body at Beaumont Hospital in Dublin. He said, quote, "I always hoped that someday she would be found. I cannot have the same hope for Dean." End quote. The way Dean died, his father called it what he believed it was, a brutal killing. There were no words to describe the pain, the anger, and the despair. What hurt more, he said, was watching how Dave was portrayed, and how, even while out on bail for killing his son, Dave was able to take a holiday in Spain. He recalled the legal battle that followed Dean's death, not just over grief, but over where Dean should be buried. He said he was totally stressed out. Then came a painful twist in this story. You might remember this little fact from part 1. Christopher said that his estranged wife, Audrey, had taken their children on a 2-week holiday to Spain in 2004 and never came back. It wasn't just a holiday at all. It was a move. Now, years later, that history formed the backdrop to tragedy. In her own statement, read aloud by prosecutor Remy Farrell, Audrey Fitzpatrick said, quote, "Since I received the tragic news of my son's death, my life has been like a living nightmare. This is not a single tragedy. It's losing both of my children." End quote. Amy was still missing. Dean was gone forever. She was now the mother of a victim and the wife of his killer. And yet, she stood by her man. Quote, "Dave, too, has lost everything. He did everything in his power to find his beloved stepdaughter, Amy, and he still does and will continue to do so." End quote. She called Dave her carer, the man who had, quote, "literally picked me up off the floor." She acknowledged the court's verdict, quote, "I can't disagree with the verdict. Dave did produce a knife. I have forgiven him, but not forgotten." End quote. Sarah O'Rourke, Dean's partner and the mother of their young son Leon, also gave a statement. Her words were raw with absence. Quote, "Knowing I'd never see Dean again was soul-destroying." Leon was only 18 months old when his father died. He didn't understand why his daddy wasn't there. Sarah said, quote, "It broke my heart listening to my son looking for his dad. I told him his daddy was a star in the sky, and angels took him." End quote. The court heard Dave had 2 prior convictions, a public order offense in 1995 and a dangerous driving incident in April of 2013, for which he was serving a suspended sentence at the time of Dean's death. His counsel insisted this act was entirely out of character, stating, quote, "He had no record of violence, and he accepts the verdict." End quote. He added that Dave had instructed him to apologize, especially to those who had spoken in court, those who had painted the picture of a vibrant young man lost, and of a son, partner, and father mourned every day. David Mahon admitted to holding the knife that killed Dean Fitzpatrick. He stuck to the story that Dean had walked into the blade. But Miss Justice Margaret Hennigan had heard enough. She announced that Dave would be sentenced on June 13th, and so the courtroom emptied, its silence replaced by the waiting for closure, for justice, or for peace, if it was still possible. On June 13th, the jury found Dave Mahon not guilty of murder, but of manslaughter, and he only received a 7-year sentence. Some believe Dean was silenced, just like his sister. Christopher Fitzpatrick spoke to the press outside the court, saying, quote, "I just thought it would have been a longer sentence than what he got. Dean was a nice young man, only growing up. He was a young man when he died, far too young to die. Things have been very hard. This will help a bit. I just feel the sentence could have been longer, but that's the way the system seems to work here." End quote. Dave had offered an apology inside the courtroom, and when Christopher was asked about it, he responded, quote, "I wouldn't accept his apology under any circumstances. He did what he did. We know what he did, and everybody is aware of what he did." Dean and Amy's aunt, Christine, added, quote, "We are relieved that this process is over, as it has been a long road to get here. Today has given us some closure, but we still have a long road ahead of us in the search for Amy. Dean's death has been a huge loss to our lives, and we will never forgive the man that killed Dean. He has put us through hell and back. We have some hope now for Amy with this person coming forward in this other case of missing schoolboy Philip Carnes. We hope that people come forward and give the information that's needed as regards Amy. She needs to be found, and we still have that road ahead of us, and we will keep fighting for her. The latest developments in Philip's case has given us hope. There's always hope. We will fight to the bitter end to get truth for Amy. Hopefully somebody will come forward now with information of where Amy was that night, and please God we find her. Dean's death has affected us terribly. No words can explain what this killing has done to our family. Our lives were turned upside down. Christopher's life was turned upside down completely. His children. It's absolutely devastating looking at my brother and Dean's child and his girlfriend Sarah, seeing how it is affecting them so badly. Justice was served, but not as we would have liked it. It should have been a life for a life." End quote. Christine went on to speak about Leon, Dean's little boy, saying, "Sarah brings him up to the grave regularly. It's sad looking at a little boy with no daddy there to see him go to school. He'll be starting school this year and getting his graduation next week from play school, but he misses his daddy." End quote. Now that Amy's brother Dean is gone, his death will pose even more questions, and the people left behind, Audrey, Christopher, Sarah, and young Leon, among others, continue to carry the weight of both absence and tragedy. There are so many moments of such deep sadness throughout all of this, yes, but also so much strength. Somewhere out there, the truth still waits to be found. Let's meet back here next week with part 3, where we continue this journey through Amy's case, the loss of Dean, and the fight for justice. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, friends, please stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode. As we close out, let us not forget awareness is our greatest defense. In a world that can be dark and grim, vigilance is our beacon of hope. When it comes to the cases we have explored together that have remained unsolved, if you happen to hold a piece of the puzzle, dare to step forward. As author Lois McMaster Bujold once said, the dead cannot cry out for justice. It is a duty of the living to do so for them. Until we reconvene, my friends, stay vigilant and stay informed.